Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ant Pod. This is now episode 21, and last time was quite a special episode. Definitely not for all people, but if you enjoyed it, I'm glad to hear that. But what we talked about last time, or what I talked about last time, was a little bit behind the scenes because I just had a big mite problem with one of my colonies, and that is what we are talking today. That's what we're talking about today and what we're discussing. Because mites is a common thing, and I personally got very scared at first. Then I calmed down a little bit, and then I managed to get very scared again, and then up and down a little bit. So we do have Sam is on here, but he's only gonna be here for the beginning. And as sorry, Casey, to say it, but you, Casey, and we are not too clever regarding mites. We also got Lynn, or aka Nino Tudo, on the podcast. Can you say hello, Lynn?
Hello.
Wonderful. So Lynn, do you have any experience with mites?
Well, sadly enough, I have too many experience with mites.
Good thing I called you, and then.
Oh, God.
Can you just name a few of the stories?
Well, do you want the short version or the long version?
Well, since we only have Sam here for 20 minutes, let's go for the short one, so Sam can spread some knowledge as well.
Well, there's a lot of different type of mites, of course. So, ant-related mites, I had a beautiful colony of yellow crazy ants. And they were not doing that one. I was not sure what was going on until I took a closer look, and there were mites on top of them. Like the whole tube was covered with mites, but I never noticed because of the sand in the tube. And then actually one of my first two Lasis niger colonies also had mites inside the tube. I actually released that queen back into the wild, and she survived because the tube was left behind with the mites.
Oh.
And then one of the bigger stories with mites is, of course, my maculatus setup being overrun with mites, but those mites were actually predatory mites that took over the setup.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're gonna get a little bit into detail with a little bit later. So you have a little bit of experience. So for those who don't know what mites are these tiny creatures that can both live with the ants, but they can also live off the ants. And there's a fine line between good mites and bad mites. But generally, it's impossible to avoid the good mites. The good mites are not good, but they're harmless. But it's quite hard to have them within a setup if you're not too good at cleaning, like me. But as long as you clean everything up and have a sterile environment, mites shouldn't really be something that comes to your setup. I'm just gonna, for all those who didn't hear Pod 20, I'm just gonna do a little quick recap of what happened with my colony. So I have a Caribera diversa colony, and they were doing very well. They had a lot of brood, and I bought them, and then I put them in this new nest, Wakushi medium gypsum nest, and in this nest, they were doing very well, and I didn't want to disturb them too much. I just wanted to let them explode. And every time I looked, they have a lot of eggs and larvae, and they were just doing better and better and better. Until one day I decided to do a little stream on them, where I recorded them a little bit closer. And that's when it became very apparent that I have a lot of mites. Thousands of red mites sitting on the different workers and the queens. So I decided to take my macro camera out. And with that, I could also see that I had thousands of white mites out in the outworld. And Sam, I think just because Sam, you're clever, and we do have you here. Can you explain the difference between the white mites and the red mites? Because I think you know quite a bit about them.
Well, it sounds like what you're describing is the white mites. We refer to them as grain mites over here, which are basically they are technically a type of mite. But they'll be around in a setup, and unlike the bad mites, let's call them, that latch onto the ants and cause a real problem to the ants, the grain mite, their whole existence and purpose is basically just to clean up detritus and things like that. So when a setup gets kind of a bit dirty, or you've got a big trash pile, or some food's gone a bit kind of stale, things like that, the grain mites go, hang on a minute, this is a perfect opportunity or place to live. They start reproducing like absolutely crazy, and before you know it, you've got these little white mites going around, which panic quite a lot of people. The reality of it is, unless they get kind of thousands and thousands strong, they're not going to be a problem at all. And they wouldn't be a problem even in high numbers, it's just they consume a lot of food at that point, right? So it could be, okay, maybe they're actually taking the food away from the ants.
Yeah, it becomes a rivalry.
Yeah, but again, you're talking about big numbers. On the flip side, the other mites you're on about are the ones that actually are the problem to the ants. So you get a few types. You've got ones that just cling onto the ants and kind of weigh them down and just use the ants as a host. You've got others that actually kind of take the blood from the ants. I'm not sure the exact species and names and things like that, but they're the ones that really pose a threat to your colony's kind of life, because they're either tiring the workers out or kind of taking the life out of them, basically. So they're the real problem ones.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting with my colony is I thought they were very bad mites because there were so many of them. But the more I talk with people, the more it seems like it was more these mites that weigh the ants down, because since the colony has so much brood, and okay, a little timer there. But since the colony has so much brood and generally looks to be doing well, it's probably not any of the blood-sucking mites. For those who've seen Ants Canada, he put out a video a few years ago where he had some blood-sucking mites, and you could very fastly see from one week to another that the colony was just dying rapidly because of these very bad mites.
And you'll see that a lot quicker, because they are literally draining the life out of the ants, right? So a small little worker, the queens will obviously stay alive longer because the whole colony is feeding the queens and making sure the queens are okay. The rest of them are just going to get drained out week by week. You'll see colony numbers drop drastically. Like as you said, the other ones, you won't see as much of a kind of an impact. Apart from on the workers, they just seem like they're in a little bit of a distress, trying to walk around and things like that.
Yeah, it does look. It looks very scary, but as the colony doesn't look to be too harmed, that's what calmed me down, because I saw thousands of these mites, but I also saw a lot of workers walking around. So I think it's never something you want to be happy to see. But I think for my case, I mean, the mite situation isn't over at all. The colony may just be dead in a week. I don't know yet. But right now, I'm positively minded. Just to do a whole round around. Casey, have you had any mites problems or experience?
About the same week you announced your problem with your ants, I double-checked my ants because, of course, that made me anxious. So I double-checked, and I was having, like, a little bit of an outbreak of the non-predatory mites, the grain mites.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of careful, and I opened up my nest a little bit and just kind of blew them out. I don't know if that helped, but then I picked out all the stale food. But outside of that, I mean, all my colonies have grain mites, but I haven't had any issues with the bad mites.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot of the time with grain mites is something I can see with my colonies. I think the reason it's gone so bad with my Caribera is because they came with dirt in that tube. And where with all my other setups, I recommend people to take the food out after 48 hours. But I started not taking my protein out after 48 hours, but waiting a whole week. And that's because I could see that the food was drying out and it was just dry. And there wasn't any mold and there wasn't anything at all. And I did the same with all of my setups and there were no issues. But what was different with the Caribera setup was that when I initially moved them in, they had a lot of dirt that they took into the gypsum. And the gypsum was, of course, wet, making the dirt wet. And then they took the wet dirt out of the gypsum, making the outworld wet, making everything not wet, but very humid. And when I didn't take the food out like I never do, then the food started becoming a very good environment for these mites. And I think that's why the population have exploded so much without me noticing at all, simply because they have the perfect conditions. Now, the big question is, of course, where do the mites come from? And the grain mites, as far as I'm aware, if anyone knows better, you can correct me. I think they just generally live with us humans, with our food and all over the place. And I just want to say again, these mites are tiny. I mean, they are 1/10 of a size of a 2 millimeter Caribera worker. They are tiny. Tiny. I can't see. I didn't know my flowers had mites until I did a macro and someone said on a YouTube video, "Oh, your colony has mites," because they are very tiny. But the grain mites generally just live with us, and that's why if they have these humid conditions within an outworld where you don't take the trash out, well, then they'll start to have a lot of fun within the outworld. But the predatory mites, of course, it's very different from all over the world. But the theory is, as far as I've worked a lot with other people to get this information, but the theory is the reason I have these red mites that are not good mites, it's probably because as the queen left Thailand, a bad mite had put an egg on the queen, and this egg had just stayed in this kind of not hibernation, but yeah, just waited. I don't know the proper word for it, but it's just been waiting until the perfect conditions were met. And in the test tube, the conditions weren't met. But in the gypsum nest, it was a lot more humid, and that's when the egg hatched, and that's when it all started.
So this goes back to it's the same with grain mites as well. A lot of the time, in most colonies, I'd make a prediction that there are mites just laying dormant around somewhere. And I was talking to Rich Banker about this, and we've come to the conclusion that mites are pretty much present. And obviously, if you send a colony out, or if you see it at home, your colonies might look completely fine, right? But how do you know there isn't dormant mites kind of laying around and all the rest of it? And they'll actually spring to action, say, if a colony is slightly stressed out and they're not doing so well, or maybe lack of food, all these kind of factors, and then good environments for the mites, and then they'll spring to action. Because I'd like to think, there's no way of knowing, but how many colonies technically had mites within them, but they were just really healthy and all the rest of it, so you didn't actually see them. Because not every single colony that you have with mites is going to be as badly affected with mites as others. And then it also goes down to species as well. You'll see certain species are a lot more affected by mites, or a lot more prone to mites than others. Which again kind of backs up the point of, why is that? They must all have a decent amount of mites within them then. It's just some are affected a lot more than others, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I know Lynn have not a funny story, but an interesting story with predatory mites. But Sam, what do you do when you have a mite problem? What's the next step to then? What's the next thing to do?
If we're talking about the bad mites, the grain mites is easy. There are a few options. You either just clean up the access, and then week after week there's less food for them. They slowly start to die out. Or the simple bit of a cotton wool, and you literally just affected areas wipe away, and they'll wipe away really quick. If we're on about the bad mites, we've tried a few things. There were things that I think it came from Ants Canada, to be totally honest. Things about lemon and different bits and bobs. Which I think can work to a certain degree, but you're not really tackling the root problem. It's a bit like if you go to people who want to kill ant colonies, right? You can kill 5 workers, but you know the queen is going to keep laying eggs because we know that's how it works. So we're not really stopping the root problem with that. I think the only way that we've really found that works is getting a type of predator mite to the bad mites, let's call it. And they basically, you buy them in a little bottle, they go in there, provide the optimal conditions, a bit of substrate, something for them to breed in, and they'll start to repopulate. And as they repopulate, they'll eat the eggs of the mites, so they can't kind of repopulate, and then the bad mites start to really, really die out. The predator mites also eat springtails and things like that. If there aren't many springtails in there, they'll really focus on the bad mites, which is what you want.
Yeah, so we have 3 different types of mites. We have the mites we don't care about. We have the bad mites, and then we have the predatory mites, which are the mite hunters.
I'll try and find the species for them now, just because I just refer to them as bad mites, predator mites, and all the rest of it. But I get that's not very useful for anyone else. We have a
No, I mean, this is generally just information. I think if you really need the species name, you can contact Will and Antics, where I got a lot of my ideas from, or Sam. But also Lynn, you have a different story. So you said before you had an outworld where the predatory mites took over. Were they predatory mites that you had introduced to save other mites, or what's the story there?
Do you want the long version?
Yes, no. It's approved.
Okay, well, starting at the beginning, actually, we rescued some chickens. And
Alright.
chickens are prone to carry blood mites. So we rescued those chickens and we brought them to my parents in France. And when we came back home, I started noticing the blood mites being on my gerbils, which is a type of rodent. I was like, shit, what am I going to do now? So I looked online at the different predatory mites available in the Netherlands, and we have Dutchies or Tauros. And the Dutchies are actually they hunt when they're hungry, and they eat about 5 to 10 mites a day. And the Taurus actually lay around waiting for the the bad mites to come around and then attack them and eat them. But the Dutchies need a higher humidity, and that's kind of a bad idea with gerbils because they have dry cages and you can put water in there. They don't like it. So I bought the Taurus, which they like high temperatures and low humidity, and I bought like a whole lot of them. I bought a whole bucket of predatory mites because I had to treat all of the cages. So I dumped those guys in there and hoped for the best, just wait and see, because you can't really do anything. And I started noticing that my maculatus was coming less into the outworld for some reason. So I was taking a closer look because some guys asked for some photos of my colony, and I was looking at this major, and she was standing in the entrance of the outworld, her mandibles wide open, being really angry at something. I was like, "What? What's going on? Maybe they're hungry. Is there not enough sugars? I've not fed them for 3 days, so it might be the sugars." And then I looked at the sugar feeder and the feeding dish and everything else, and there were all these white dots everywhere. And the Taurus predatory mites are white and really tiny. And they like heat. And my maculatus is the most heated ant of all my ants because they're from Africa. And all of them from the gerbil setups all crawled over to the maculatus setup to hang out in the outworld because they could not enter their nest because of the ants. And they just stayed inside the outworld, hanging around everywhere, and the ants were too scared to go out to eat because of the mites everywhere. So I just unhooked to get rid of them because 120 euros of mites, but I unhooked the outworld, took out the remaining ants, and actually just purged the whole outworld with water to get rid of them.
That was a good purchase, I can hear.
Never again.
Yeah. So so what went wrong here was I had to say, but it's just the wrong species, right? I mean, but of course the problem is that you weren't hunting the mites weren't the predatory mites weren't for the ants, so that's I guess that's what caused the problem, right? Because the predatory mites were meant for exactly.
Yeah, you also get different species of predator mites, so it depends on. I need to find out. I should have prepared a bit better, but I know there are ones that you use for chickens. There are others that target slightly different things. But yeah, I'd have to find out. So maybe the ants prefer one lot of mites over the other, as I said there.
Yeah, that's the thing. When I added in my predator mites, so I got hypernathics miles. That's what I was recommending, and that's what I added. And what I saw the first few hours was that the Carabara workers were hunting the mites, the predatory mites, and actually eating them, which led to me straight away feeding them a big roach to make sure that they weren't hungry, because I could see that could be an issue. I can say today that I still have a big mite problem, but I also have 1,000 predatory mites running all over the place inside the outworld. So what that hopefully means is that the predatory mites will eat the eggs of the bad mites, and when the bad mites die, they won't come back. So that's what, as far as I'm aware, that's what they do, right, Sam?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we hope. I've never seen them actually physically attack the mites. I know some do. But I believe the way it's meant to work, and I could be completely wrong and embarrass myself, but it's the fact that you're just stopping their whole egg cycle. So they're going to eventually get old, and if there are no kind of newborns to replace the old ones, it's common sense they're going to die out, and then your ants start to recover. Which is why week after week after week, you seem to see less mites on the ants because they're dying off, and you've got no new ones to replace them. So that's kind of how it's meant to work.
Yeah, I think what you're saying right there with embarrassment is very important because not just changing the subject, because I know Casey has something to add here as well. When I initially put out that I had mites, a lot of people were like, "How could you not see this? How did you do? You did this on purpose, and how could you let it get so bad?" And And before we started recording, I actually talked a little bit with Casey. And Casey, can you bring up the point with how you looked at me before before you came into this podcast? Because I think it's funny, at least to me.
Like, so when people watch YouTubers, they're used to like watching people on TV, and so they think of YouTubers as celebrities. But like, and so they look at them as like they with Holifer being the YouTuber, he like I personally, when I would watch him and like we started talking regularly, I came to the realization that Holifer is just a normal guy. Like, he's not a professional. He's a casual ant keeper just like me. And so I think a lot of people got upset when they realized, like, when he announced, like, when his ants got mites, because they thought that he was an expert. And I think they got mad at him because it kind of ruined their mental image of Holifer. Like, they celebritize YouTubers. The YouTubers aren't celebrities. He's not rich. He's not the end all be all. He doesn't know everything about keeping ants. He knows enough to get in trouble just like the rest of us. But like, it's not a professional.
Yeah,
And,
so
like,
of course, when that happened, that led me to do the whole part 20, which came out last week, which I think only Casey right here has heard. Also, shout out to Simon listening live in as a family member. But yeah, I thought it led to some very interesting points. Aesthetic coming out also saying that it's annoying that there's so much toxicity. And Lynn, you also showed a picture of your Maculatus mites, and I think just to bring it back, Lynn, you also made a brilliant point on Instagram with dogs, ticks. Okay, can you try to re-say that?
Yeah. When your dogs or cats have fleas or ticks, does that make you a bad pet owner? No, it doesn't. If your kid comes home and has lice, does that make you a bad parent? No, it doesn't. But when your ant has mites, why does that suddenly make you a bad ant keeper? It shouldn't. It doesn't.
No, I think that is a brilliant point.
Really well said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember also, because I talked a lot with Sam and Rich when it happened, and Rich also said that he have dealt with mites a few times, and it all as far as I could hear, it's gone well all the times. And he's starting to just think mites as an inconvenience, but not like, oh my god, everything is gonna die now. Because I was going completely screaming girl, going just completely flipping around. I didn't know what to do. All mental breakdown when I saw the mites. And Richie calmed me down, saying, just order some predatory mites and add them in. I just think it's a lot worse represented on social media than it actually is in real life. I'm not saying mites are good or anything. I just think maybe our mindsets is a little bit too chaotic, because I remember when I saw grain mites or was told that I had grain mites on my flowers, I went completely chaos, saying, oh no, what do I need to do? And I contacted a lot of people saying, what do I do? Before everyone just said, nothing. It's grain mites.
It just comes down to lack of knowledge, I think, and not just you, but in the general kind of community. And it seems to be whatever you do is that if you don't know something, people tend to fear it. So it's, oh my god, what are these? They were running around everywhere, instant panic. As opposed to when you spoke to Rich, he's dealt with it so many times at this point, it's just right, breathe, chill out. This is what you need to do, and it's fine. The first time, he was probably the exact same as you, because we don't know what they are until you start learning their knowledge, and then with knowledge, you're a lot more chilled out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, you're completely right. So we also did ask people online, because I'm interested in what people said with how many had mites, because as far as people on social media contacted me, it seemed like not a lot of had them. Before we do that, I just want to add to the lemon method, because I was also, a lot of people recommended me the lemon method, but just as many recommended me not to use the lemon method. Have you guys tried the lemon method and see? Because Sam, you talked about before with it may deal with some of the problem, but not the entirety. I think I can't remember who said it to me, but I think someone said that they had a queen that were sitting straight on the lemon, and all the mites were dying, and they changed the lemon. I think it was for Kushi, I'm not too sure. And he said that he changed the lemon and everything looked good because the mites were dying, and then the mites were gone, and then the queen died. And I had a lot of different people actually saying with the lemon method, the queen often dies afterwards due to the toxins of the lemon itself. I don't know if you've heard any of these stories.
I haven't heard any of them. I know that it's kind of my thinking is just the common sense around it. So if you've got a mite, and I've seen some ants before, they will use the lemon, kind of just go up to it and chill out around it. I don't know if there's any point behind that, but it would make sense if they do, because the lemon is really acidic. So the mites aren't going to enjoy that at all. And for something so small and something so acidic, it's probably going to kill it. But my thinking behind it is, well, if it's killing the mites, then an ant is only a big, it's not that far bigger than, you know what I mean, what I'm saying, the mite. So I don't know. I'm not 100% sure I'd kind of put a load of lemon in a whole setup when I care so much for these ants, when I see what it's doing to the mites, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Antimatter, he says right here that my Tetra set up base under the lemon and killed himself.
Yeah, it doesn't. The lemon, if it's killing the mites, it must not be good for the ants, right? They're not that different.
No, that's why they decided to avoid it. Lynn, you know generally a lot about the things in the hobby. Have you heard anything about this?
Well, I've heard a lot of things about people recommending lemon, but that goes about both ways, because when people say get rid of mites, they say use lemon. But when people say get rid of ants, they also say use lemon.
Yeah.
Oh, they do. I didn't know that.
And there's also, I've seen 1 or 2 comments on Facebook about mites that say you should put in lemon because mites love lemon. So it's going all crazy all over the way with lemons. I'm not sure which one is true or not now.
No, I'm happy that I have a lemon right next to me, because the first thing I did when I found out I had mites was to go and buy a lemon. I'm very glad I didn't do anything with it, because a lot of people said, wait, don't do that. Yeah. But I did ask people what they thought if they have had mites, and what the general people have had with problems. I would like to say thank you for being here, Sam. He will leave now, so it will be just the 3 of us, and Simon, of course, listening live in. But yeah, I asked if people had mites, and 64% said no, never. 23% said yes, one time. 6% said I have mite problem now. 2% says all my ants have mites. That's not too good. And then 5%, or maybe it's just realistic. Yeah. And then 5% says what is mites. But I think it's very continental based compared to how many mites you have, because I feel like all the bad mites you see in Ants Canada's videos, I don't really hear about them in Europe. I don't know if it's because generally we don't have such mite killers in Europe, or what it is. Of course, you talked a little bit about the bloodworm mites, Lynn, but I'm guessing those are too big for the ants, maybe, if you could see it with your eyes. Are they like big, or?
Yeah, they're the adults of the blood lice or blood mites. They're actually big enough to see with my eye and squish with my finger.
Okay, so are they too big to sit on ants then?
No, definitely not. Well, I'm not sure if they can sit on like Lasius niger or Phaidoli, but with my maculatus or Iridomyrmex or Pachycondila, they could definitely sit on there. But I would see my Crematogaster like hunting them, because they're the perfect snack size.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's same with my Carabao going out hunting them. So the thing, what I was trying to get out is just I feel like it isn't as much of a problem here in Europe with the bad mites, because if you look at Ants Canada, he have had mites quite a few times with his massive yellow crazy ant colony. They had mites. They had one kind of mite, and then they got another kind of mite, and then his Campanodus, the colony showed very for only a few weeks, months, also got mites. And of course, he's based in the Philippines, and I don't know if the problem is just a lot bigger there.
I mean,
Yeah.
he basically lives in a terrarium. So, like, of course, there's going to be a lot of mites there because I know the Philippines is pretty humid year round, and they don't get the same kind of winters we do.
No, definitely not. And I think, yeah, you hit the nail right there. The humidity. That's what makes humid areas so much better for the mites. And I also think that that's why I have a mite problem now, because my Carabera queen, she comes from Thailand, which is also a quite humid place. So I don't know where I'm going with this. Yeah, hang on. Let me just find some comments, because we also have quite a few comments to hear people's general stories about them. And once again, a lot of people actually responded. So one of the response I thought a little bit weird about. I mean, it's kind of 50-50 whether it works or not. But we have SWAT Gaming saying, my advice is moving them into a naturalistic setup. This limits viewing captivities, but it's the best this limits how well you can look at the ants. But it has a better survival chance for the ants themselves. What do you guys think of that? Is a naturalistic setup better for mite saving?
I don't know if you're good at it, like that might be. Did Ryan write that comment? But
No, he didn't.
it might work. I don't know. It's kind of it kind of seems like a Hail Mary move.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that, I think. Just because in my eyes, a naturalistic setup is always quite humid. Whereas in a what is it called? Artificial setup, you can control the humidity a lot more. And I think that's where you can dry the mites out almost. What are your thoughts, Lynn?
Well, with a naturalistic setup, mites might actually also thrive in naturalistic setups, because the Carabera came in a tube of dirt, and my yellow crazy ants actually also came with a tube of dirt. And it's likely that the eggs of the mites or the nymphs of the mites might have been laying around there in the dirt, waiting until the heat was rising and the temperature and the humidity was rising until they could hatch.
Yeah, that's also my big suspicion. Maybe the eggs didn't even sit on the queen. Maybe the eggs just were in the dirt. That's actually something I hadn't even thought about.
It's very common with a lot of exotic species that they get actually transferred, like Singularis and Carabera and the yellow crazy ants, of course, and actually also with Tetramorum bicarinatum. We are lucky that we have a lot of those being bred in Europe, actually, so no more importing. But they get imported with mites a lot. And they used to have mite problems in the past. A lot of shops used to have trouble with that. I'm not sure if... Sam might have known more about that. But like my ants, I've heard, which is a shop in Germany, actually had a lot of trouble with them sending out exotics, which actually carried mites for a long time.
It's actually an interesting point. Is it the shop's responsibility to check for mites before sending? Or is it kind of just like because you expect to buy a healthy colony? I guess it depends on what shop you're going for, because in my eyes, it's always the shop that needs to make sure the ants are mite free. But it's also impossible to do that. It's a weird dilemma.
A shop can hold a colony in quarantine for 3 weeks and not notice any mites, but the mites can stay dormant for a long time before they start developing and actually thriving and breeding and getting big enough for the eye to see. That's a problem.
Exactly, and that's also what I've done after seeing my mites on my Carabera. I've gone back and looked at the footage because I did record the colony when I got them, and the clips are not the best, but I can't quite see anything. I can't see any mites crawling all over the place, and for my eye, the colony looks to be healthy and nice. which it has also been for the longest until I saw the mites. And now I've put this whole rescue mission into saving the mites or saving the colony. And maybe it's just it's a strange problem. I also heard that a lot of once colonies are established, they'll be able to deal with the mites themselves. I feel like I have a little bit 50-50 whether I think that that's reality or not. I think it really depends on the size of the mites because, like you say your Kurmagasta go out hunt the mites. The Carabera also started to hunt the predatory mites, but the predatory mites are like 5 times as big as the red mites that are on the ants themselves. But I think if you are lucky, they can. Well, they can save themselves.
I think Ants Canada debunked that.
Oh yeah. What? Can you remember the story?
Well, his yellow crazy ant colony was quite the size before they got all the way dragged down by the mites.
Yeah, and then what? Yeah, and then he added another colony into that, right? Oh, are you thinking of the Campanotus one?
No, that one was a small colony. But his yellow crazy ant was a fully mature colony, and they could not handle the mites. They could not take care of themselves.
No, they lost the fight until he. But the thing is, did he use any predatory mites? Because I can't quite remember the story, but didn't he just add another crazy ant colony?
I think he did eventually because he ended up getting those what are the big rhinoceros beetles, and the predatory mites live on the rhinoceros beetles.
Oh yeah, he did that whole thing. I remember. Oh
Yeah,
he tried.
I only know that because that's one of my least favorite episodes, and it comes up all the time. But it's fine.
Oh yeah, that's true. He got the beat. Oh yeah, he did so many weird things instead of just buying a box of predatory mice. That's true. All right, Casey, can you read one of the other comments if you have any you like specifically?
I'll read the next one. Antkeeper Richard says, I think the 2 most popular methods of removing mites is Lennon's and predatory mites. We've already went over that one, so I'll read Ants of Sydney too. Says, I have mites in 2 of my colonies, but both are harmless. Ones that eat waste, not a very pleasant sight, but they're actually helpful. So,
I think that's a very good point. What you're saying right here. The waste or what Ants of Sydney is saying. Because with my leaf cutters in that trash, there are like small worms walking around, and there are also small mites all over the place. And the worms things, I was a little bit scared what they were until I noticed that Ant's Hood also have the weird worms in his colony. And these, I don't know, worms and mites seems to generally keep the trash down. I know Wakushi, he has, and his, I don't know if it's both of his setups and his acros and his Ada, but he has some other mites that eat the trash. So he almost doesn't have to clean the trash because the mites, are good mites and they just eat the trash. And that's again where mites can actually be good. Because when I showed my Ada colony, I had a lot of people saying, oh no, you need to do the full mite treatment because you have mites all over the place. But maybe it's within the good mites. And I'm just having a realization as I speak right here. Because I did add mite killers. I did add the predatory mites to all of my setups. And since then, my Ada Mexicana trash pile have skyrocketed. Like, they have produced 5 times as much trash in the same days as before. It's gone to a whole nother level. And I'm thinking here thinking, maybe my predatory mites have killed the good mites that were eating the trash, and that's why they have so much more trash now. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I just thought of that now. So I think
either your good mites in the Ada are gone, or they've had a small population boom that you didn't notice.
Yeah. No, it's the opposite way. It's the opposite way. I have way more trash. It's gone a lot worse.
Oh, jeez.
So that's why I think the predatory mites may have killed the trash-eating mites. I'm not too sure. But I think what that is also a good point is to just think of what you are doing. Sit down, have a breather, and start chatting with people before actually starting putting a lemon in and doing all of this. Because if I had put a lemon in there, my Carabao Queen may have been sitting on the lemon right now and be dead next week due to the. I mean, just if you smell a lemon, it's so sour.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that it isn't good. I mean, would you sit on a lemon if in real life? A massive lemon. I don't think it's very healthy with the gases it must produce. Yeah.
I think most of the bad stuff comes from the rind of the lemon because that's a defensive thing for the plant.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see just the general acidity of the lemon juice being either eventually bad for the ants, because it's not like you can take the lemon out and then give your ants a bath, you know.
No.
Otherwise, it'd be a lot easier to get rid of the mites too.
Yeah. I'm really questioning the whole lemon method. Maybe it works wonderful. Maybe it is as bad as we talk it to be. I think it's important to just take a breather. Now, what I'm just gonna hear. I'm interested in hearing your guys' opinions. What I did when I found my mites was I put them on another table. I think it was I don't know if it was Yulin or maybe it was Aunt England Sadie who said you need to quarantine them straight away, because I saw the mites and then I looked to the next colony before people went crazy in the comments saying, dude, you need to quarantine them, and then that's when I went crazy as well. But what I did personally was I took all of my tweezers. Normally I would recommend, if you only have 5 colonies, to have 5 tweezers, 1 tweezer for each, because the tweezers are what interacts with the ant colony itself. It goes in to grab the food, and on the food there may be mites, and then the mites will be on the tweezers, and then you can get the mites from one colony to another through the mites sitting on your tweezer. And I can see that after I've worked with a Carabara that the mites are coming straight on the tweezers. They just come on them as soon as you put them in, because there's so many. So what I would recommend, if you can have a tweezer set for each of your colonies. But else, what I did after I saw my mite problem is I went out, put all of my equipment in a ball of boiling soap water. So I put a lot of soap in a little, I don't know, box, and then I put boiling water in there, and then I just let it all soak before washing it out clean. That's what I hoped killed any eventual mites that any potential mites that may be on the setups. And then I just took all of my tweezers and I put a tweezer set and a scissor and handling tweezer and just a normal tweezer, all 3 next to the Carabao colony, and then that's only what I'm using for the colony now, just to make sure. Now, Lynn, you said before that you had washed your
What's word?
yes. What were the Maculatus? That was the word I was looking for. Maculatus outworld. I talked with a few people what I should do with the old outworld. So what I did was I connected a new outworld and transferred the workers and a lot of the mites properly. But what I did with the old outworld was, after recommendations, people said soap water, so people said hot water. But people also said freeze the outworld. So my outworld is currently in the freezer. So I will freeze the outworld for, I mean, it's been in there for a week, but it's in there for 2 days, and then you can wash it with water afterwards with hot water, and that should kill anything. At least that's what I've been told. So now I'm sharing my story onwards.
That sounds like sound logic to me. It all that makes perfect sense. That's pretty much what I would have done as well. Is, hot soapy water, and then yeah, I get extremes in temperatures are likely to kill anything really.
Yeah, exactly. Also, something I just thought of is that, of course, when you have mites within your Carabara colony, what you can also do, if you what I do is I take my tweezers and I grab a roach and I kill the roach. But that means my tweezers that I've been within the ant colony is now also down at the roach farm. So I've also added the predatory mites to the roach farm, because the roach farm may also be infested filled with mites, the bad mites. So it's just everything needs to go through a thorough clean. Now, what all people also said was it is not enough to put the mite colony in one corner of your ant room. You have to put it in a different room at all. If you can't put it as far away as possible. And I sat there thinking, nah, that doesn't matter. But in my macro recordings, I can see that the mites are actually escaping the outworld. So I can see that the mites are able to escape my outworld. So yeah, even though you think the ants are safe in there, just remember that the mites, that can sit 50 to 100 mites on one 2 millimeter ant. So yeah, the mites can escape the outworlds.
Yeah, that's exactly how the Taurus came into the Maculatus outworld, because that's a fully sealed outworld. And they came from the cages of the gerbils all the way across the room, walking towards the Maculatus setup.
It is insane. I just love that you shared the story of the Maculatus just sitting in there, being almost pushed into their nest. That's interesting. But I guess
was too scared because of all the mite stories that I indeed did not stop to think, and I just acted out by rinsing the whole outworld before actually watching like what is happening or documenting anything. So that's the only downside.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking is, you said your mites, the mites you chose were not the one that went out and killed 10 a day. It was the one that waited until the bait kind of came over to them.
Mm.
So in theory, they would just die out because they wouldn't have had anything to eat within the outworld.
Well, they eat each other.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. Oh yeah, well, yeah.
And I'm not sure if those would also, because of course I would feed my ants, they might have also eaten the roaches that I feed the ants.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably would have, because protein is protein when it all comes down to it. But I think we are getting close to wrapping it up. Is there any final things you guys want to share regarding the whole mite thing?
So I have kind of an idea, but I don't know if it's recommended or if it would be good, because I know some people, and this is probably considered unethical, people will yell at you for this, but I think you could, I'm not recommending this. This may not be a good idea. So just all that preface is maybe you can dry out the nest and still provide drinking water, and that might be bad for the mites, but not as bad for the ants.
That's definitely. I think it's definitely a valid point.
But maybe not like also like another Hail Mary move, like maybe if you're absolutely like if you're convinced they're just gonna die, maybe put them in the freezer for 5 minutes or less, probably less, just to see if, because the mites are smaller, so my logic being the mites will freeze faster than the ants will, and the ants can. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably a bad idea. I wouldn't go with that. But if you think your ants are gonna die, if you think they're gonna die, and you've kind of just got to the point where maybe it'll work, but yeah, probably not recommended.
I would like to say, from at the behalf of the Antpod team here, if your ant colony dies after putting it in the freezer following Casey's advice, we would not be account responsible for that.
Absolutely. I will not be responsible for you killing your ants.
No, I don't. Putting an ant in the freezer, I think that is very, very. I think it can be a very dangerous idea, even for 5 minutes.
I've heard people doing it to move colonies before, like to calm the ants down, and then you take them out.
Oh, but that's the fridge. That's a fridge.
Fridge.
The fridge isn't as dangerous.
Less cold. Fair enough.
Yes.
Yeah, don't put your ants in the freezer unless you're convinced they're already going to die.
I think that's well said. That's well said. I think what you said, depending on what species you have, of course, Miss Mike Carabera, it's quite hard to dry them out because it will harm the colony a lot. But with something like Camponotus, what I noticed in the outworld was a lot of the mites were gathering around the water source. So you could, in theory, just dry the nest out if it is Cambonotus, only leave them water, and then just replace the water tube and clean it. Because that way all the mites will be sitting on the water tube and you will take it out and you will put a fresh one in. I don't think it's
That's
the
a
most
better
efficient way, but that should in theory work a little bit.
Because maybe
I don't
you
know.
can lure them off the ants. I don't know.
Again, I would like to say that we are not any kind of professionals. I had never dealt with mites before I saw them, and that's also why I acted my ants will die and went all crazy on social, which went on to people saying, how could you let it be so bad? But I think what I've always thought is I just pushed it out saying the day I have mites, I'll deal with it. And I thought that day would never come, but now I'm sitting here. And if the colony managed to survive, my treatment have been very simple. I disconnected I of course cleaned all my equipment just to make sure that the mites won't come to another colony. And then I separated the colonies. But the only thing I really did was I took the old outworld with thousands of mites inside and attached a new outworld and then transferred the ants. That way, instead of having thousands of mites, there's only a few hundred maybe. And then I just dumped in a lot of the soil with predatory mites inside. What I can see now is that the colony is starting to move into the soil, so that's a backlash. But if the colony survives, that's something I can deal with. So, yeah. Lynn, do you have any final words regarding mites?
Well, not at the moment. I think I've said a lot. My brain farts.
Well, you are excused because I mean the podcast at the moment we are a little bit 50-50 with the team. I think I'll go out and hire a backup crew because Sam hadn't responded. So I was sitting here with Casey, and both of us are not too mite clever. And Sam, and we sat there thinking, we need some kind of good source, and that's why we got Lynn in. So Lynn, she was asked to join 10 minutes before we recorded. So I think you've done well then. Anyway, of course, Lynn, you haven't prepared any ant news, but Casey, do you have any ant news for this past week?
I've been quite busy this week, so I actually haven't had time to
Casey.
find much. I've been pretty reliable with my ant news, but I'm sorry I didn't come through this week.
Whoever's keeping count, that's finally one down for Casey. Finally one. But yeah, I don't have too many ant news either. I put my ants into hibernation officially in a fridge this week. They've been in a cold room for the past 2 weeks. What I have seen a lot is I've seen a lot of small ant companies, these 3D printing companies starting. I do follow a few of them just to see what's going on. And
I have noticed on my Instagram as well, actually.
Yeah, there's a few on Instagram, and they have made like the aesthetic mini Outworld copy, and then they have made the Venus copy and the Saturn copy, which do whatever they want to do. What I've noticed now is a few of them have actually started doing some quite unique things. I saw a 3D printed nest with a white tongue inside today. That looked quite nice, and yeah, I do like following these small stores. When I just see a Venus, I mean, I have nothing against people copying if they can improve the design. But when I just see like a Venus copy, I don't necessarily think that's something. It's a sore topic that I think I can say some wrong things. I'm gonna move away, but I do like to see some innovation. I like seeing some innovation from the small stores. I do like them. I do like seeing some not before seen stuff. But with that being said, guys, that has been it for this week's podcast, all about mites. And you will hear more from us at the Ant Pod next week.